All right, folks, we are back for part 4 of the January Q&A. There's going to be another Q&A up in a couple of weeks. If you have any questions for that, just pop them down in the comments. That'll be on YouTube and also on my Instagram and on my Facebook as well, wherever you want to follow me. Yeah, so let's crack on with the questions, and that'll round out this month. So if we start with Callin's question, this is a good one. Callin says, is sumo really that bad? Sumo deadlifts. I personally have used both sumo and conventional. I can even pull more on conventional, but why all the hate? Right. It started off as a joke, Callum. So back in the early 2000s, powerlifting was very much an equipped sport. So raw powerlifting wasn't really a thing. Okay. So back then, most people would pull sumo because they could get more out of the suits. I mean, I did some equipped deadlifting as well, and equipped. I competed, I think, equipped once. You can't really get much out of an equipped deadlift suit. Like, it's just not. It just doesn't work very well. You get more out of equipment if you pull sumo. So you see a lot of these big sort of American equipped lifters. They tend to pull sumo because, like, you know, guys like Dave Hoff, the guy who totaled 3,000. They always tend to pull sumo because you can get more out of the suit. The suit is really, really tight. You grab the bar with your legs straight and you just grind yourself down into position and you pop out of the hole. You can't really do that with conventional. It doesn't work as well. So to get the most out of the suit, you go sumo, right? And then also, you know, you've got the argument that, well, the sumo style is a shorter range of motion. You know, it just added to the joke. The joke was that sumo was cheating. Conventional was a pure way of pulling because it's a longer distance, and also you don't get as much out of the suits. Like two guys competing in equipped powerlifting, one guy with a deadlift suit, one guy with a sumo deadlift suit on a sumo. Sumo guys are going to get more out of it. That's why it was kind of a joke. Now, over time, because the internet just exploded and powerlifting and fitness on the internet exploded, people forgot it was a joke. And two, people take jokes and they take them too seriously. And so they end up forgetting that the joke was a joke and they end up taking it seriously as a rule. Like, there are people out there who talk about the sumo as being actual cheating. But I think they just don't realize it's a joke. But that's where the joke came from anyway. It originated mostly from it being equipped powerlifting. You can get more out of the suit. And yeah, that's pretty much where it came from. But it's just a joke. So hopefully that kind of shed a bit of a light on the historical significance of where that sumo's cheating came from. All right. Ilian Berladjanu says, sorry if I got that wrong. What's your go-to row movement? Well, Ilian, I like anything which is chest supported. So I've used a bunch of chest supported machines in my lifetime. And I think if you're looking at a whole program, assuming you're doing a lot of squatting, a lot of deadlifting, I think a chest supported row is the best thing for upper back alongside chins and pull-ups. I don't want to be limited by my lower back or my hips or my legs when I'm doing rowing movements. I want to take my upper back to the hilt. And I know Jeffrey Veritas Schofield has some very good arguments about why you should cheat a bit more using rows, and I agree with him. But in the same way, you can cheat a bit more on chest supported rows as well. But just start off with a stricter format, not pounding your lower back, because your lower back's already getting a pounding with deadlifting. And if you're adding to that with your rowing, it means that your overall volume during the course of the week for deadlifts will have to naturally go down because you're doing a lot of heavy cheat rows. So it just upsets the balance in my experience. Like, I'd rather people do chest supported rows, lots of deadlifting. That fits. It's fine. I think if you had a situation where you're insisting on doing a lot of cheat bent over rows, cheat dumbbell rows, you're going to just cut into your deadlift volume dramatically. And you don't want to do that because deadlift is a great bodybuilding exercise. So that's kind of my opinion. I think the only time when, I mean, that's my preference. I think the only time when I would like people to do a lot of bent rows is maybe they're not very good deadlifters. Some guys are not built to deadlift. They have longer torsos, shorter limbs. They're very good at squats, very good at benches. For those guys, they might be better off doing less deadlifting and maybe more bent over rows, strict bent over rows. that's not a bad idea, because then you're taking some of that lower back volume away from the deadlifts and you're putting it into heavy bent over rows and heavy dumbbells. So that's a situation where it works. Either way, you've got to balance your lower back volume. For me, as a preference, I like people doing a lot of deadlifting. I think it's a very valuable exercise. Deadlifts, stiff leg deadlifts, good mornings, Romanian deadlifts, hyperextensions. Alongside that, I would do a lot of chest supported rows. I think most people very much underplay the usefulness of deadlifts and deadlift variations, as well as good mornings and hypers and glute ham raises. And they undershoot those and overshoot the heavy bent over rows, heavy dumbbell rows. I just think it's an inefficient way to train your back. So the answer to this question is very much more about the overall program and actually managing lower back fatigue than it is about actually what you do for your upper back. So for me, yeah, chest supported row, because it makes the entire program a lot better. All right, let's tick that off. So let's see. Mabdalal17 says, can I use a stiff leg deadlift for building most of the year and switch to conventional only when peaking the last 2 months? Yeah. I mean, there's a video I did. There's a video I did on this where I was illustrating a deadlift cycle. It's somewhere in my video catalog. I talked about how I would set up a long off-season deadlift cycle, and I would start off with the primary movement being, say, a stiff leg deadlift without a belt and maybe touch and go, then transitioning slowly to a stiff leg deadlift with a belt, dead stop, and then a full deadlift with a belt. And you can do that over the course of an off-season. I mean, you can include other variations as well, but as the core of your program, that works very well. That's what I would do. Most of the year, I would stiff leg deadlift. I would only really conventional deadlift heavy prior to a competition, maybe for a training block, about 8 weeks. So yeah, I think that's a great way to go. You don't need to do conventional deadlifts year round. I actually think it's better if you do stiff leg deadlifts. If you're a powerlifter. My go-to lifts for powerlifting when I was competing and I was at my strongest was a high bar squat with belt or without belt. I classed them as different lifts. The close grip bench, that was a very good movement for me. And also the stiff leg deadlift. Those were the variations which gave me the most carryover. I think now, as a coach, I use those variations with a lot of powerlifters, but I also use variations of those. So rather than a close grip bench, we might do the close grip alongside, say, a close grip incline. We might do a high bar squat alongside a box squat, low box squat. We might do a stiff leg deadlift alongside a deficit stiff leg deadlift. So you're taking the lifts, the primary variations, which are hard movements, and towards stricter and harder than the main movements. And then you're also having a next tier of movements, which are even harder. So you go from deadlift to stiff leg to deficit stiff leg. They all build the movements up, you know. Same with the bench press, close grip bench press, and the close grip incline. So these are all exercises we can add in to make sure we're working as hard as possible, and we're building up the areas of the lift, which then build up the next lift, which then build up the next lift, which, you know, altogether they're like an orchestra of exercises which all push each other up. And he said, I'm more of a short-limbed, long torso deadlift, just beat the shit out of me. Actually, Abdullah, that's the opposite. If you, oh no, sorry, no, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, as I was saying in the previous reply, you might want to have a situation where you're doing more bent over rows as well. Substituting some of that deadlift volume with bent over rows done strictly is not a bad idea. But yeah, stiff legs are fine. And just make sure you're also doing a lot of hyperextensions with weight. Good mornings, Romanian deadlifts. These are all, you know, hip hinge exercises which you can do, and you can do them heavy to build a deadlift. Even the box squat for you is not a bad idea, because the box squat, if you reach right the way back, it will pull on the hamstrings, because you'll be, when you get up off a very deep, wide sort of back box squat, you tend to activate the hamstrings. It's kind of like jumping out of a chair. So yeah, I think that's fine. Vary it up. Okay, Richard says, hi Faz, returning to training this week after a couple of weeks off sick. In the meantime, I've been reading and loving your version 2 of your wizard. Thank you. I wanted to start your running program alongside the wizard. I train at home and usually late at night, so I would be using a treadmill. Cool. My question is, for the other 2 cardio sessions, I'm limited. So yeah, what Richard's referring to is my running routine. So I do my running routine about once a week, and I have 2 other sessions which I kind of vary. So he says I've got skipping and punching, Would they be a good choice? I've also got kettlebells. Yeah, these are all good choices. Richard, I want you to think about training your cardio more like training your energy systems rather than training the actual exercise types. Like, for example, the analogy is this, right? Let's say you want to build your chest, okay? Do you have to bench press all the time? No. But you might want to bench press at least once a week. And then you might do other things which target the chest, like the dumbbell bench, the weighted dips, the incline press. Now, in the same way, when you're trying to build your cardio, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get your heart rate up for a predetermined amount of time. Yep. So the running routine has your heart rate up for anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes. Now, for the other 2 sessions of the week, you might want to do a quick 20 minutes where your heart rate is up. What I like to do is I like to do sprints. And you could do the same thing with your boxing. So with boxing, you could go hard for a minute and then just jog around for a minute. Okay. Dance around for a minute, go hard for a minute. Or, I mean, even you might not be able to go hard for a minute, go hard for 30 seconds, all out, and then just dance around for about a minute and a half. That's 2 minutes. Repeat that for 10 times. That's good. Same thing with skipping. With skipping, go hard for a minute, rest for a minute, go hard for a minute, rest for a minute, and do that for 20 minutes. Yeah. And kettlebells, similar kind of thing. You could do swings, do maybe 20 swings, rest for 30 seconds, or you could set up a circuit. You could do 20 swings, just literally off the top of my head, this is Richard. Every minute on the minute for 20 minutes, you could do 20 kettlebell swings, 15 bodyweight squats, and 5 burpees. There you go. That's a workout for you right there. And as long as you're getting your heart rate up regularly for those 20 minutes, it doesn't matter what the activity that you do. It's in the same way, it's analogous to weight training and bodybuilding. As long as you're hitting your chest for X number of hard sets per week, like 10 to 20, it doesn't really matter what exercise you do. Some exercises are more effective. Like, for example, if you're doing dumbbell flies and cable crossovers, you might need more of them because they're not worth the same set as a bench press set or a dip set. But you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. It doesn't matter so much about the modality. What matters is what happens to your heart rate and you putting in the work. So that's what I would say. Keep the stress off your joints. Do and vary it up. Those 2 sessions of the week, do 20-minute punch bag intervals or like a bodyweight kettlebell EMOM, something like that. But that's great. Love the channel and really enjoy your stuff. And add in like the anabolic T counter. Thank you. All right, thanks, Richard. Hopefully that kind of made sense, Richard. But I think it's a good schedule. I mean, right now, I do jog once a week and I do sprints twice a week as well as my training. But I like it. My sprints are dead easy. I will sprint for 10 seconds followed by 20-second rest. And then I just repeat it. It works well. Okay. Next is Hydro Majestic. Hi, Faz. Love your straight up, no BS approach. Thank you. Question regarding fatigue management within the session. I find that using heavier weights, say around 8 rep max, and staying away from failure, maybe 2 RIR is the best way to get a lot of volume in, as the fatigue doesn't accumulate as much as I use light loads to failure. If I add in a couple of sets to each movement, will that compensate sufficiently for the lower volume per set? By the way, this is about hypertrophy. Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the bottom line is, are you able to progress week in, week out? Yeah, because let's say you've got a 8 rep max bench press and it's 100 kilos. If you take that from 100 for 8 to 120 for 8 over time, you will get bigger. Now, the extra volume, if you decide to do some extra volume, that will be good to break past the plateau, potentially. The volume is only there to enable you to progress. Because I guarantee you this, if you went down to, say, 5 sets of bench presses, and that's all you did per week, after a while, your progress will die because it's not enough work to stimulate the growth necessary to continue training. Like, I think people misunderstand this. It's like the volume doesn't always drive the growth. Okay. Like the volume doesn't always drive the strength. The strength is driven by the volume. That's the better way of putting it. So people think they need to do like a certain amount of volume to accomplish growth. Like, yes, but that should also accomplish the strength gain. I'm not sure I'm explaining this very well, but what I mean is, like, strength is pushed up via the volume you use. If you reduce your volume to the point where it was very low, you wouldn't get stronger and you wouldn't get bigger either. They both go up at the same time because you're doing sufficient work. So you will know if you're doing enough volume if you are getting consistently stronger. So if you take your bench consistently every month, you're gaining some strength, you know you're doing enough. That's the bottom line. So in terms of, you know, what you're asking here, should I add in a couple of exercises? Well, have you stalled out? And if you've not stalled out, you don't need to worry about it. What you're doing is enough. If your volume ever got to the point where you did stall out and it was due to undertraining, then you would stop getting stronger and you would stop gaining muscle as well simultaneously. It's just very much hand in hand. I think people have this misunderstanding that you can get stronger from low volume, but you can't get bigger from low volume. Like, if you get stronger, you'll get bigger as well over the long term. So should you do more volume, or should you add in more lighter exercises? If you're gaining, you're gaining. When you stop gaining strength, that will be evidence that you've stopped gaining muscle. Then you add in stuff. As a general rule, most people are pretty good between 10 to 20 sets, with at least 10 of those being compound movements. Like if you're doing the bottom baseline, you know, amount of volume, like 10 sets, you better be doing all of those as compound movements. I think if you're going up to the 15s and 20s, then that's when you can add in like isolations. That's generally how it works. So hopefully that answers your question, Hydro. You know, it's if you are getting stronger week by week or month by month, that is evidence enough that you're doing enough. You don't need to add any more in. When you stop gaining, that's when you can potentially look at adding more in. So let's just pad out this question a bit more. So let's say we've got a guy who's doing, let's say we've got a guy who's doing 18 sets per muscle group per week, and they're all compounds, right? And that guy stalls out. Well, quite likely, he might be sore and hurting, and he might be doing too much. So we would back the volume down. But maybe we don't want to back it all the way down because it's just joints that are hurting. It's not his muscles necessarily. So we might stick with the same 18 sets, but we might take the number of compounds down to, say, 12, and then replace 6 compound sets with 6 isolation sets. So the muscle is still getting the same work, but the joints aren't getting quite as much stress. You see how that works? So there are ways to increase volume and manage fatigue without having to rely on just doing compounds. And this is where isolation exercises come in. When you want to increase your weekly load, but you don't want to increase the stress on the joints because you've reached the limit for how much your joints can handle. Like me right now, I can probably do squats variations a couple of times a week. If I was to, for let's say maybe, I don't know, 6 sets of my leg work could be compound squat exercises, I can no longer do 12 to 15 sets of squats a week. I could have done when I was younger, but I can't do that anymore. So I can make up the volume with leg presses, single leg presses, leg extensions, stuff like that. So that's kind of how I would bear in mind, you know, increasing volume. Also bear in mind the role of compounds and isolation exercises in adding volume. Sometimes you can add more volume in, which is useful volume, via isolation exercises or higher repetitions. And if you added the same volume in with compounds, then it would break. It would break you. So just bear that in mind, okay? Hopefully that gave you a decent answer there. Right, so now, okay, JP says, is directly training the soleus muscle necessary for hypertrophy? Asking this because the soleus is underneath the gastroc. I won't ever show. It does show. Like it shows. Like, it's the width of your calf. Like if you have any muscle on your calf, you'll see when you tense your calf that that's the width of your calf. So yeah, it does show. Having a hyper-built sort of gastroc and a very small soleus looks silly because your calf looks narrow. Soleus definitely should train that. It'll make your calf look thick. Right. Robert says, for beginners and intermediate lifters whose focus is hypertrophy, what progression methods do you use or recommend? I typically follow a rep goal method in my training. I know that's popular from Steve Shaw's channel. Start with a weight at 75% of 1 rep max, set the starting sets at 2 to 3, and increase sets once I reach a rep goal. At max 3 to 4 sets, I reach rep goal. I think we all know what rep goal is, so I increase weight, drop to base sets, and work my way up. Okay. Once I stop progressing over a full week, I deload and rest for a week. Yeah, fine. It's a good system. Now, the system, I'll say, the system that I use with a lot of my clients is a little bit different, but they're both good systems. Like a rep goal system is fine. My 8s, 5s, and 3s is fine. The reason that these systems are good and they're necessary is for 2 major reasons. Okay, Robert? 2 major reasons. The first reason is they keep you consistent. That's a big reason. Huge reason. The amount of guys I see at the gym, 1 week they're doing 5s, next week doing 3s, next week they're doing 10s. It's insane. Because if you think about it, there's nothing really different about those set and rep schemes. They're all the same, pretty much. You know, whether you're doing 5s or 8s or 12s, they're all pretty much the same. But if you are constantly switching around from doing 5s and 8s, there's always a transitionary period where you're not gaining strength. You're just getting used to the new sets and reps. That's where people lose progress. They get used to it for a couple of weeks, and then change your mind again. Get used to it, change your mind again. So the biggest advantage of having a system is consistency. Okay, that's the biggest advantage. It's all psychological, Robert. It's all psychological. Getting somebody to stick to something for a long enough period of time, it's all psychological. And I know this as a coach because that's it. It is what it is. The second thing is it keeps progression slow. At a certain level, even adding 1 rep to a set is hard. And it represents quite a high percentage of your 1 rep max. But you say to a guy who's a 3-plate side bencher, okay, you just bench 3 plates for 5 reps. And now, next week, he benches 3 plates for 6 reps. He'll be like, ugh, that sucks. Because he's used to progressing fast. Because when he was a 2-plate bencher or a 1-plate bencher, he was progressing 5 kilos at a time. That doesn't happen when you're when you're strong. When you're actually strong, progress is slow. Just like when you're actually lean, progress is slow, because further fat loss is slower when you're leaner. So the second advantage of these systems, like Steve's rep goal system or my 8s, 5s, and 3s, is it keeps progress slow and consistent. My 8s, 5s, and 3s is a way of manipulating loads and volume and ups and down, up and down, up and down, just to eke out that little bit of strength every single time you're in the gym. It's a very good system for that, but it slows progression down. It's the kind of system where you can sit into it and just be happy over the course of a few months or maybe half a month or a year of progress. Whereas if you just stick to regular sets and reps, sometimes it's hard to add a rep. It gets very hard. 1 rep might represent a 5 kilo increase at a certain level of strength, you know? So these rep goal systems, they're useful for 2 major reasons, and they're all psychological. It's crazy. Like, as a coach, let me just be honest with you. That's what they're useful for. It's all psychological. How do you get somebody to be consistent? How do you get somebody to accept a lower rate of progression because that's appropriate for where they currently are? It's 2 massive things. So there you go. From one coach to his audience, like, these rep goal systems, they're useful for those reasons. Because at a certain point, when you get so strong, adding 1 rep is the equivalent of adding 5 kilos, and you can't do that at that point. So that's why you have these rep goal systems, which make that progress more palatable and make it more acceptable. Sometimes progressing from a 100, let's say a 3-plate bench for 5, which looked messy 1 week, compared to a 3-plate bench for 5, which looked clean the next week, a month later, that's progress. Even just cleaning your form up is progress sometimes, but people don't think that's progress. When you get to a certain point, progress is very slow. You've got to bear that in mind. So just being honest with you guys, like, that is why rep goal systems are so valuable. There's 2 major reasons. I mean, maybe I'm being slightly cynical there. There are other reasons as well. I mean, it's good to have a variety of different rep schemes as well. Like my 8s, 5s, and 3s, you cycle through low and high reps. So there is an advantage there, and cycling through volume is an advantage as well. But I'm just trying to make a point. Hopefully you understand that. Like, those are the big reasons why. So stick to your rep goal system. Even if you decide to do like the barbarian or, you know, wizard routine, you can still carry forward the rep goal system to that. You can do rep goal on the heavy day on the wizard. You can do the rep goal on the barbarian heavy exercises. You know, you can still carry it through. Just stay consistent. But hopefully that gives you a bit more info about the usefulness of these things. Okay. All right. So James said, "Hi Faz, can you explain how you would approach your pre and post workout nutrition?" For most guys, James, I don't do anything special. Now, because most guys have enough fuel in their day, because they're in a reasonable surplus or they're at maintenance and they have a reasonable amount of body fat. Where it does make a difference is if you're contest prepping. So when I was contest prepping, it made a massive difference. I mean, I could pretty much only work out in the morning after breakfast because the rest of the day I just didn't have any energy. When you get to a certain point where your body fat is so low, you just have a complete lack of energy. Anything above and beyond that previously is just placebo. You should be eating a reasonable amount of calories per day throughout the day. If so, you're going to be mostly well fed. So I think what's more important to discuss than timing pre and post-workout nutrition, if you're eating enough, is having sufficient amounts of the right nutrition across the day. Like, for example, water. You should be having, as a grown male, you should be having at least 3 to 4 liters per day. Salt, potassium, these are things which should be right up there as well. Probably about, I mean, it varies, and I'm not going to provide any sort of hard and fast numbers because I don't coach you, but like roughly in the ballpark of about 5 grams each of salt and potassium is not a bad way to go, and it's supported by USDA guidelines on how much we need as athletes and also as regular people. But people don't do that kind of thing, so that's another thing, and assuming we're eating enough carbohydrates as well, like that's important across the day. We don't just use the carbs which are directly prior to our training sessions or directly after our training sessions. We store them. So I think it's important to have those 3 factors in play. I also think it's important to have a regular, consistent amount of protein throughout the day. I'm not a massive fan of fasting for muscle gain. It's okay. It is slightly suboptimal. In some situations where people are overly fat, it's preferable, but that's not taking into account pure muscle building. So yeah, pre and post-workout nutrition, I approach that very carefully. If I'm contest prepping or if I have a client who's contest prepping, then it's very different. But I'm assuming you're not asking about that. I'm assuming you're just asking about regular contest, regular training. I don't place a lot of importance in it. I think there are some interactions when if you are enhanced. I think for some drug using guys, there's something to be said in that area. Maybe. But again, I think it's overblown. I think it's something which is useful for selling supplements. I just don't think it's that useful. I'd have to know a bit more about your particular context, James, but I don't think it's that useful. It's not something I prioritize unless we have guys who are 10%, 8%, 6% body fat. If you're 15, 20% body fat and you are doing special things pre and post workout and you're eating 3 or 4 regular meals a day with enough protein, carbs, salt, water, everything, it's placebo. Okay. B. Monty says, hello, Faz. I've decided to make it my long-term goal to hit the 3-4-5 plate club. Good. Assume that is 3 for the bench, 4 plates for the squat, 5 plates for the deadlift. Assuming my best for each is in pounds, 210 times 7, 245 times 7, 335 times 5. What would you say is a reasonable rate of progression per month when back in a surplus? Okay, good question. Good question. Very well worked out. So 210 for 7, you're not actually that far off a 3-plate bench. I think 110 kilo bench for about 8 is probably going to net you a 140 kilo bench. Probably. Maybe 115, 120. But you're not far off. So 100 kilo bench for 8 is about 220 pounds. And I'm thinking probably another 40 pounds on top of that. So you're about 50 pounds off bench. Probably a little bit more off on squats. So let's say 60 off squats. And maybe more off on deadlifts. I think the good rate of progression would probably be about 5 to 10 pounds per month. I think it's good. 5 per month is fine, because then you're looking at a consistent 1 or 2 per week. 10 pounds per month is maybe a little bit more appropriate if you're squatting and deadlifting. And I do say, I think per month is a very good way of looking at things. So if you were looking at, say, my program like the Barbarian, those tend to rotate in 3-week cycles. You could do 4-week cycles as well if you want to, if that suits you better. But roughly 3 to 4 week cycles is fine. And then I would suggest trying to aim, say, okay, this block, I'm going to add to the bar this amount. Like if every block you start, you say, okay, the aim is 2.5 kilos, great, that's fine. Because then, let's say you do 3-week blocks and you do, I don't know, 15 blocks a year. Well, you've added on 25, I don't know, something like 35-ish kilos right there. It's pretty good. So it adds up. This is these mental games I used to play when I was younger as well. It's like if I add this amount per week, I can add this amount per month, and then by the end of the year I'll be this strong, and it works. It works. It's a nice way to stay excited about things. So I would say realistically, 5 to 10 pounds, more like 5 for benches, more like 10 for squats and deadlifts. That's great, because in an ideal circumstance, if you did that for a year, that is like 100 pounds on your squat and deadlift, which is insane. Like that's probably not achievable. And so 50 pounds every year for your bench is probably not achievable either. But at least you're in that ballpark where you're okay, 5 to 10 is what I want to aim for. Some months you'll get it, some months you'll maybe hit the lower end, but that I think is a good ballpark to aim for. Hopefully that was useful. Right, let's see. I think we're almost at the end of these questions now. There was one more from Bilal. Yeah, last one from Bilal. Bilal says, Faz, when you regress in strength, what is that an indication of? It's been happening for 2 weeks now, only on compound lifts, other isolations are fine. I'm maintaining my weight and sleep's in check. Okay, it's quite interesting he said that his isolations are fine. Here's what I find sometimes. People's bench presses will stay stagnant, but the other lifts will go up, like the incline bench, standing press, close grip bench, feet up bench, all these things will go up, but the bench press remains stable or stagnates. That means you're overtrained on the bench press. You can overtrain on one exercise. You know, it's if the rest of your strength is going up, it means you're overtrained on the exercise. It doesn't mean you're overtrained in the area. So I would probably sub that bench out for a while, or at least don't expect much progress on it for a while and just push up the other bits. So let's say, for example, just to give you an example, let's say we are talking about the bench, okay? And let's say you're a long-limbed lifter. So you've got long limbs, which means that when you're benching, there's quite a lot of focus on your shoulders, on your triceps, yeah? And let's say when you bench press, you're stuck on the bench and you kind of die off the chest. All right, cool. In that case, let's build your shoulders and your triceps. And we also have a few other things, like your overhead press is not very strong. Your close grip bench is proportionally not strong. Okay, great. Well, we are going to work the hell out of the shoulders and the triceps. We're going to use main variations, which are going to work the hell out of those. So let's say over the course of a week, we have 4 pressing exercises, 4 main presses. One might be the bench. Stick to the bench, keep it in there. And then the other ones might be close grip bench, overhead press, and a close grip incline press. Okay. So we're using exercises which are really pounding up. We might put the bench on the back burner. We might have the bench in, but as a secondary exercise. So maybe on your Monday, you do incline bench, heavy, then you do regular bench press as a secondary exercise, because we're really pushing the other things up. So that within maybe a few months, we've done some progress on the incline, close grip bench, standing press. We go back to the bench press. We've still done it, but we go back to it, we do it heavy, and hopefully that should just push up. So from what it looks like here, Bilal, if everything else is going up, like you're getting bigger, you're getting stronger, but you're overtrained on the bench movement. So in terms of like your limit, your bench is your limit for everything else. Okay, so push everything else up, and your bench is going to go up as well. It'll get dragged up. Your bench is probably proportionately stronger than everything else. Everything else has got room for improvement. So push those things up. To give you one more example, let's look at the squat. Okay, let's say your squats just died, right? You can't progress on squat. Okay, push the hell out of your leg press, your safety bar squat, your front squat, your box squat. Push the hell out of all those. Maybe good mornings as well, you know? And build up all the muscles involved with the squat so that when you go back to using the squat heavy and as your main primary movement, it should have more potential to go up. Sometimes you can just burn out on a movement. You just put it on the back burner for a while. It push everything else up with barbell exercises. I think all too often we put like the bench press on a pedestal. So the only barbell exercise we do is the bench press. Like how many of you, it's better in 2022. We have YouTubers like me talking about different bench variations, but how many of you realistically just do the bench press as your main barbell pressing exercise? What about the feet up bench press? What about the close grip bench press? What about the incline press? What about weighted dips? These are all, you know, barbell-ish exercises you can do, apart from the dips, but you know what I mean. Seated press. These are all like barbell pressing exercises you can do, but how many of you guys really do that? Like there are plenty of variations we can use which will work our weak links and allow that main lift to go up. I think a lot of people just say, okay, I'm doing an upper body day. Bench is my favorite lift. Then I'm going to do some dumbbells and do some cables, but the bench is the only barbell lift. There are other barbell lifts we can push things up to push up the whole. Right, folks, hopefully that was useful. I will call it there. The new Q&A will be up in a couple of weeks, so please go ahead and put the questions in for that, and I will speak to you guys